a lot of the times, SSA will see either from mental health counseling notes or progress notes from your doctor, or even, mentions in your own testimony, kind of engagement in activities, such as things like traveling, going to social events, taking classes, or even hobbies like, gardening, things like that. And what these adjudicators or the judges will do is they will basically question whether your symptoms are persistent and severe enough as you testify to, despite engaging in those activities.
So, hello, Isabella Baez. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. So, thank you for joining me today. I really, really appreciate it. Um, so first, just as a little bit of a general information, I may end up calling you Izzy throughout the interview today, but it's just because, I know you're Isabella, but those of us who are kind of know you better, know that you like to be called Izzy. But you're a full-time attorney who works for Evans Disability. And what I'd like to do is just have you talk to some potential clients or our current clients and let them get to know you just a little bit. And so if you could give us maybe just a little bit of background about who you are, where'd you go to school, and just hobbies, things like that, that'd be great.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me today, Peter. Good to be here. A little bit about me. I'm originally from the Midwest, but ended up getting my undergraduate degree in global business from a school in Southern California. And there I played collegiate soccer and lacrosse, and also ended up studying abroad in Beijing, China. And there I kind of completed this integrative Mandarin language program, stayed with a local family. So that was a crazy experience in college. I'm very grateful and, privileged to have been able to do that. After undergrad, I ended up moving to Oregon since my family is located here. And then actually ended up leaving again, though, to go attend law school. And I attended University in North Carolina, Chapel Hill. That's where I got my Juris Doctor. And unfortunately, I was one of the lucky ones who got to take the bar exam during COVID in 2020. So that was a very different experience, going through that and basically getting licensed to practice law at a time where we weren't really able to meet in person with anyone. So I'd say my experience there is a little different than previous or future generations of lawyers. But, that's just a little bit about me.
Yeah, what a unique experience. Now, when you took the bar exam, just out of curiosity, did you do that in person somewhere, or was it just online, or how did that work out?
Sure. So Oregon actually did a pretty great job of handling the bar exam during that time, in that they actually allowed the applicants and the test takers to choose whether, if you were in Oregon and you had gone to a law school that has a certain rate of acceptance, and pass rate to the bar exam, that you actually were allowed to kind of not take the test. So that was really helpful for a lot of people who, had concerns about their health or their families and didn't want to go into person. But actually, I decided to take the test, and we were kind of split up into hotels, where Oregon bar administrators would kind of separate us out into lines, and it was very structured. They only put about like 10 to 12 of us in each classroom, and then there was very structured breaks where we would actually have to go like single file with the masks on out, into the lunch break and things like that. So it was kind of interesting, but other states for sure didn't do as great of a job, I don't think. So I'm lucky to be in Oregon and the Pacific Northwest where they cared about that.
I think when I took the bar, they just put us in one of those big conference rooms, and there was all right, we were just packed in there.
Yeah, that's actually what a lot of my colleagues experienced in North Carolina, even during COVID. So it's very interesting to see.
So one of the great stories I love is how you ended up working for our firm, and it's a little bit unique in a way. So maybe you can share with folks, how did you end up working for Evans Disability?
Yeah, so basically I ended up After my entire law school experience, and, passing the bar, really just something that I've always been interested in is disability law itself. It's kind of always interested me about like the Americans with Disabilities Act, Section 504 of the Rehab Act, things like employment discrimination and reasonable accommodations. And that's really because I'm pretty close with the disability community myself. I have a family member who grew up with a physical disability, who uses a wheelchair. So I definitely understand and have seen all of these systemic barriers to not only getting, state or federal assistance, but also equal access to basic rights like education, employment, public transportation, everything like that. So I definitely understand as well that this society and kind of the world we live in is just really not set up for people with disabilities, and that, there are just so many things that are inaccessible
Right.
and created with, neurotypical and able-bodied individuals in mind. So experiencing all that, being very close to the community myself, that's kind of why I am practicing disability law, and ended up, finding Evans Disability, which I think has a great core mission of really, giving hope and encouragement to people of the disability community.
And one aspect too that I love about your story is that we were actually recruiting, or I hadn't put out a job post, but you're such a go-getter and just such a high-level achiever that you ended up emailing me directly and then saying, hey, I just wanted to introduce myself, and if you're ever looking to hire. And I think that I was so impressed by just like, hey, you put yourself out there, reached out to me, and then we started to talk, and then obviously ultimately you're here and have been working with us ever since. So
What really drew me to Evans Disability in the first place is that, I saw on your website, it seemed very accessible to people with different disabilities, with like, who have visual impairments or hearing impairments. You had videos, you had blogs, all of those sorts of things. And then you also had a very diverse staff with women and people of color. So I really appreciated that as well.
well, it's you've been a great addition to our staff as well. So it's been a pleasure working with you. What maybe you can tell, I can just say, hey, you're a lawyer and or an attorney, and people kind of have something in mind of what that might look like, especially in a Social Security disability law firm. But what is it that you specifically focus on or do for our firm? And maybe you can tell our clients or potential clients what you do.
Sure. So, the biggest thing that I focus on with Evans Disability is appeals of final determinations within the actual federal court system. So basically what that means is that if a claimant goes through the entire SSA disability process from application to their final appeal at the appeals council, and are ultimately denied and not found disabled, I review those cases for potential civil action against Social Security itself, for basically making any legal errors in that unfavorable decision. So I do find that, SSA and hearing judges in particular, if they fail to properly evaluate the case. So, and by that, I mean, they either fail to explain an analysis on a doctor's opinion or a claimant's testimony on the severity of their symptoms, I'll actually offer to represent that claimant and essentially sue the commissioner herself, to either try to reverse that decision and obtain immediate benefits, or more commonly, basically reverse that decision so that there are further proceedings, so that SSA and the hearings judge will actually have to go back and properly evaluate all the evidence. So that's basically the main thing that I do at Evans Disability. But other than federal court work, I've also represented claimants at the hearing level in front of administrative law judges. So I think that's something rare about me. It's something a little unique, is that I actually kind of have worked at all levels of Social Security disability, and I've kind of seen from even, intake and application all the way up to representing in front of a judge and then actually appealing in federal court.
Right. You have a really diverse background on talking, obviously going to court with the Social Security judges and the hearings, and then doing appellate work. at the federal court level, which is great too. And so let me switch gears a little bit. I wanted to ask you, what do you find probably the most challenging part of your job?
Sure. So I'd say the hardest thing about really being a disability attorney is working within the federal laws that exist at this time, that don't always really line up with the realities of disability in today's world. So the definition of disability that SSA itself uses is, based on being able to work in our current society. So this is largely based on objective medical evidence proving inability to sustain full-time competitive work. And to prove that, an applicant needs, established medical records, doctor's opinions, or other evidence that basically check all these very particular boxes that SSA has set up to systemically kind of review an incredible amount of cases across the country. Based on SSA's own public statistics, in 2022, there are about 1.8 million applications for disability in the US. With that many applications, and that continues to increase each year, they had to kind of, some sort of setup of a guideline and test for making these determinations. And so if you can't meet those guidelines with your current evidence, then SSA is unfortunately not going to find you disabled. So if you get denied, it's based on whether the evidence in your particular file meet these long established rules of, what the government considers to be a disability in terms of ability to sustain work in a competitive environment. That again, kind of as I mentioned earlier, this environment is set up for individuals that don't have disabilities oftentimes. So that's kind of one of the biggest challenges I face as a disability attorney, is not only working within this very narrow definition of disability that requires specific evidence that's not always easily obtainable for everyone, but also explaining this to clients who kind of feel like their own government has invalidated or minimized their symptoms just because they don't have physical proof to meet these special boxes of disability.
Yeah, and that can be especially challenging as well when the laws are as narrow as they are, and the healthcare system that we have in our country doesn't always serve everyone in the way that, I think we'd hope it to serve people. And so it can be really challenging. Well, let me flip that question a little bit and ask you something maybe a little bit more celebratory. What is the most satisfying part of your job?
Sure. So, of course, it's a hard question to answer, because what we do here, is it can be very emotional. It's very personal, especially to me, with people within the disability community. And we're going through people's sensitive information that's sometimes traumatic to talk about, to document, especially with, strangers from the federal government as well. So knowing how hard and long this process is for some people, I'd say really the most satisfying part is just providing this safe space for some people to relieve themselves of just such a heavy burden, especially for those who've been ignored for so long. And whether they win their claim or not, when people tell me that simply listening and trying to understand what they're going through provides so much relief in itself, it's really priceless to be able to be that person for someone and provide this kind of ear that they haven't experienced before.
That's awesome. So as we wrap up, I've been asking kind of everyone this, but if you could give one or two pieces of advice to someone who's maybe applying or going through the process right now, what would that one or two pieces of advice be?
Sure. So I will give some specific advice on basically what applicants can do themselves to increase their chances that either a disability adjudicator or a hearings judge will find their own statements about the severity of their symptoms more credible. So, and this is coming from, someone who reads decisions on the daily of basically how judges do, in particular, find claimant statements about their conditions persuasive or not. So a lot of the times, SSA will see either from mental health counseling notes or progress notes from your doctor, or even, mentions in your own testimony, kind of engagement in activities, such as things like traveling, going to social events, taking classes, or even hobbies like, gardening, things like that. And what these adjudicators or the judges will do is they will basically question whether your symptoms are persistent and severe enough as you testify to, despite engaging in those activities. So what applicants can do to kind of prepare for that is in the adult functioning report, which, we have a blog on our website for, which kind of describes in more detail. Mr. Evans here did a great job putting that video up and explaining what it is. But basically, you're filling out kind of your functional abilities. And also you state anything like chores, hobbies, traveling, driving, all of these sorts of things that you do. So in that specific form and any other testimony and forms that you fill out for Social Security, I'd suggest that, you just try to be as detailed as possible. So for example, with traveling, if you happen to take some road trips or fly on planes anywhere, maybe in the past 5 years, or kind of when you're alleging disability and what Social Security is going to look at, that relevant period. If, you happen to do that, it's really important, if you're alleging a disability that maybe, it makes it hard for you to sit for a long time, how does that kind of line up with basically being able to travel for long periods of time? Well, you can kind of describe in your adult functioning report or any other testimony that, all the times that I travel, I actually have to get out of the car, take breaks, every 5 to 10 minutes. I actually travel with other people so that I can lay down in the car. So kind of explaining and going into as much detail as possible that you can about things will definitely kind of up the chances that the adjudicator or the hearings judge will have to consider that in finding your symptom testimony credible. And other things like not just traveling. So for like hobbies as well, like I mentioned gardening. So if you happen to put that in the hobbies section of your adult functioning report or talk about that even at the hearing, it's really important to say, well, hey, I only garden for about, 5 to 10 minutes before my back starts hurting, or I use a chair while I do it. So all those kind of descriptors and qualifiers will really, really help you with your case, not only now, but down the line to provide some additional explanations for things that SSA will have to consider.
That's awesome. Well, I'm glad you mentioned that video we did. It took me about 2.5 hours, maybe 2 hours to fill out the adult function report. And, fortunately, I don't have any disabilities that would kind of interfere with that, but it's still, and I was making things up, and that still took me 2 hours to just fill out that whole form. And so, what it is on our website. I would encourage people to go watch that if you need some tips on how to fill that out. But Izzy was you're absolutely correct. You need to be specific. Like you said, if you're gardening from 5 to 10 minutes, I even say, hey, look, be specific on how long of a break you need. Because, I need a break for another 10 to 15 minutes where I go lay down. Then I maybe can go back to gardening for 5 to 10 minutes. And I can need another break for 15 minutes. Because as you and I both know, if you take longer than normal breaks at a workplace, that's a reason they can find you disabled for not being able to sustain employment. So that's a great tip. Izzy, I want to tell you, I'm so proud of you. I think the world of you. You are an amazing lawyer. I'm grateful for all the work that you do for our clients, and you do it with, care. You do it because it is your personal mission as well. And I think, and I just love that you reached out to us because this is an area of law that you aspired to do, not because you're like, hey, I'm just here for a job. So it's one of the things I admire about you, and I'm so grateful for your time today. So yeah, thank you. Thank you for, on behalf of all the clients within the firm that you serve. So I appreciate you a lot.
I appreciate your kind words, Peter, and thanks for having me today. It's a great time.
For sure.